It was supposed to be a long weekend of laughter, barbecues, tubing the Guadalupe River, and fireworks under the Texas sky. But instead, it became one of the deadliest floods in modern Texas history. Families were swept away in the night. Children at summer camp vanished in the roaring current. Hey y'all, and welcome back to Rebel with a Cause, Called to the Case. I'm Kitty. I apologize for the way I sound. I've been sick, and my autoimmune disease is flaring up too. So please bear with me. I just felt so strongly that this tragedy needed to be talked about right away. I know it's not exactly what we would usually cover, but it's devastating nonetheless. And I felt like we owed it to the victims to give as much awareness to this tragedy as possible. We're here to remember, to honor, and to ask hard questions about what happened along the Guadalupe River over 4th of July, 2025. My hope is that in talking about it, we hold space for grief, honor the lost, inspire donations to the affected areas, and commit to loving our neighbors better. If you're from Texas, you know that the Guadalupe River isn't just a body of water. It's part of who we are. Ancient cypress trees along its banks, their roots weaving into the earth like guardians of Texas history. For generations, families have camped along its banks, and people jump in to escape Texas heat on hot afternoons. The air thick with the smell of barbecue, sunscreen, and nature. Texans and visitors pack coolers and often tie their tubes together in groups to float the river, drifting lazily downstream. Campers hang out and talk about life around campfires by its banks. I'm from North Texas myself, and I too have memories of camping trips and tubing down the river. This river has always been both friendly and dangerous. It's beautiful, but it is fierce. The hill country sits on what meteorologists call flash flood alley. That's not just a nickname, it's one of the most flood-prone regions in North America. Why? The land is hilly and rocky. Rain doesn't soak in easily. It rushes creeks and rivers with astonishing speed. A big thunderstorm upstream can mean a wall of water downstream with very little warning. In fact, the Guadalupe has a long history of destructive floods. In 1987, a catastrophic flood destroyed bridges and homes, but even that didn't match what happened over the 4th of July of 2025. Let's go back to July 3rd, 2025. The National Weather Service issued a flash flood watch for the Texas Hill Country. A watch means that conditions are favorable for dangerous flooding, but it's not yet happening. Camps and homeowners along the river kept an eye on the forecast. But let's be honest, in Texas, we get these watches often, and they don't usually lead to disaster. But on the evening of July 3rd, storms started forming to the west, and meteorologists saw trailing thunderstorms. Lines of storms moving over the same area again and again, dumping relentless rain. By late that night, the rain was pounding Kirk County and surrounding areas. Around 2 a.m. on July 4th, the National Weather Service upgraded to a flash flood warning. Now that's a big deal. A warning means that flooding is imminent or already happening. It's a signal to get to higher ground immediately. But many families were asleep, and campers were in their bunks. Some people didn't get the alerts at all, maybe because their phones were on vibrate, or maybe they didn't even have reception. Local officials tried to use Code Red system, a reverse 911 style alert that calls or texts residents, but here's one of the controversies of this disaster. Many people say those local alerts didn't go out until hours later, even as late as 10 a.m. on July 4th, and by then, that was far too late for many. We need to be clear, though, the National Weather Service did issue timely flash flood watches and warnings. The breakdown was in local alert systems and the reality that people were sleeping in the dead of night when the river rose. Now let's talk about what actually happened to the river. In Kerrville, gauges showed the Guadalupe rose approximately 26 feet in 45 minutes. Upstream near Hunt, gauges recorded surges of 29 to 37 feet. Imagine that, the river that looks calm and safe during the day, turning into a deadly torrent before dawn. This wasn't just a steady rise, it was a violent surge of water crashing over the banks, sweeping away vehicles, RVs, and entire homes. Roads were submerged and broken, bridges crumbled. One of the hardest hit places was Camp Mystic, an all-girls Christian summer camp near Hunt. On the 4th of July morning, floodwaters overran the cabins and grounds. Despite heroic efforts by counselors and staff to move the girls to higher ground, many were swept away. 27 of the children who died were from Camp Mystic. Let's sit with that for a moment. These were daughters, sisters, friends, and they were there to make lifelong memories of laughter and summer fun. Instead, they were lost in a river that should have brought joy. As the sun rose on July 4th, the scale of the disaster became clear. Water was still high, currents remained dangerous, debris filled the river, trees, propane tanks, cars, pieces of homes. Search and rescue operations mobilized immediately. Over 2,000 personnel were ultimately involved, including local firefighters, police, Texas National Guard, and volunteer groups like the Cajun Navy. These volunteers are known for showing up when disaster strikes, bringing airboats, helicopters, and search dogs, a willingness to help strangers. They pulled people from trees, rooftops, riverbanks, and for days they searched the Guadalupe's muddy banks and tangled debris, hoping against all odds to find survivors, but more often recovering the lost. Families posted photos of their missing loved ones online, hoping that someone had seen them. Churches held vigils, neighbors cooked meals for rescuers and for survivors who had lost everything. In tragedy, we saw true neighborly love, and by July 7th, confirmed death toll statewide was at least 119, with 95 or more in Kerr County alone, more than 170 people still unaccounted for. Last reporting, most of them in Kerr County and nearby areas. Among confirmed dead were at least 36 children from Kerr County. It is the deadliest flood in hill country since at least 1987, and possibly one of the worst inland floods in Texas history. The human cost is staggering. Parents searching for children, families broken, generations of memories destroyed. The trauma will last a lifetime. Beyond the loss of life, the physical destruction was immense. Bridges collapsed or washed away entirely. Entire neighborhoods were unrecognizable. The region's water systems were so compromised that officials switched entire towns to well water. But in the midst of devastation, the community responded with Texas-sized generosity. Grocery store giant H-E-B sent trucks full of water and food. They opened their stores as relief centers. Churches gathered donations and distributed them. Small businesses held benefit events. Neighbors cooked for neighbors, and volunteers waded through the mud to check on the elderly. The Cajun Navy and other volunteer groups arrived from out of state to help with rescues and recoveries. The Texas National Guard was deployed to assist with federal disaster declaration and unlocked funding and support. On July 6th, Governor Abbott declared a statewide day of prayer. Flags were ordered at half-staff through July 14th in memory of those lost. In tragedy, we see the worst of nature, but often the best of humanity. As Scripture says, love your neighbor as yourself. and in these moments, we saw love in action. As communities grieve, there are also hard questions being asked. Why didn't everyone get a timely code red alert? Why were there no sirens in some communities? Why did so many not know that they were in danger until the water was already rising? Local officials have acknowledged these failures, and after action reviews are being launched. The governor has called for special legislative session to examine emergency alert systems statewide. The National Weather Service did its job, issuing watches and warnings, but the gap between those alerts and local notification systems cost lives. It's a conversation that must happen if we want to prevent the level of loss again. We must balance grief with the demand for change, not out of anger alone, but out of love for our neighbors. In telling these stories, we honor the lost and those working for a safer future. Today, we've walked through the heartbreaking timeline of 𝒃𝓃 and the Guadalupe River floods over the 4th of July of 2025. We remember the more than 119 souls confirmed lost and the children of Camp Mystic and the families who will never be the same. We've honored the rescuers, volunteers, and neighbors who showed up in the worst of times. And we've asked the questions that must be asked about warnings and preparation and accountability. If you feel called, I encourage you to donate to trusted local relief efforts, volunteer where you can, and pray for the communities, and take your own family's disaster preparedness seriously. Devastating disasters can strike anywhere at any time, sometimes without warning. But no matter what comes, we can choose to love our neighbors, to keep the faith, and put our trust in Jesus, to show up, to hope, to build a better future together. As we've walked through the story of the 4th of July floods along the Guadalupe River, I feel led to pause and widen our lens for a moment. Because while Texas is still drying out and rebuilding and recovering, we are not alone in this. In the past few weeks, devastating floods have swept across more than 30 states. Communities have been blindsided by overwhelming rain, rising rivers, and landslides and flash floods that came out of nowhere. Some towns are seeing rainfall totals they haven't experienced in over a century. Others are facing multiple floods just weeks apart, with barely enough time to clean up before the next wave hits. Rescue boats are out in places that haven't needed them in decades, and all across the country, families are trying to figure out where to go, how to rebuild, and what comes next. Meteorologists are pointing to a clear shift in how our storms behave. The air is warmer, and that warmth holds more moisture. So when these systems move, they're dumping more rain in shorter periods of time. And in many places, the ground is already so saturated that it can't absorb another drop. These aren't isolated tragedies. These are families, mamas and daddies and kids and grandparents, family and friends facing the same kind of heartbreak we've seen right in 𝒃𝓃 and along the Guadalupe. I'm here because compassion demands awareness, because when you love people like Jesus did, you can't look away from their suffering. So I just want to ask, wherever you are, will you take a moment to pray? Pray for the people who are still trapped or displaced. Pray for the exhausted rescue workers. Pray for those who lost their homes or worse, their loved ones. And if you feel led to help in some tangible way, I encourage you to look up trusted local relief efforts. And the smallest act of generosity can shine a light into someone's darkest day. We may not understand why the level of devastation is happening all at once too. But I believe with everything in me that God has not left us. He sees every tear, every home, every hurting heart, and he invites us to be his hands and feet and to step up and speak up and show up for our neighbors near and far. Let's be ready to help. Let's stay rooted in the kind of love that doesn't give up, no matter the storm. I pray for everyone affected by the devastation, and I offer my deepest condolences for those who've lost loved ones. Thank you so much for listening to Rebel with a Cause Called to the Case. I know I probably sound extra hard to listen to right now while I'm sick. I'm struggling through it more than usual. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay compassionate, and stay called. Goodbye.